Hi everyone, it's Jen again. Hope you all had a good week. This week I thought I would switch back to making a development video. I think that maybe trying to make both a Let's Play video and development video in the same week is probably too much for me right now, at least with how my summer schedule has been. Work has been pretty busy and I've been trying to do more adulting type responsibilities at home, trying some new recipes and stuff like that too. So, I think it'll be more manageable for me to just stick to one type of video a week, but I'll probably be alternating between the two. Right now, development has been a lot of like stuff under the curtains, so not a lot to show for it as I spend hours and hours of like rearranging how I'm organizing the files and breaking a bunch of code. Yeah, it's not exactly glamorous to look at. Not a lot to show other than a bunch of error screens. So I didn't really have much to share on development end last week, but this week I think I'm more ready to show kind of my progress, and then next week I'll probably doing a lot of refining and a lot of writing, and so I'll probably switch back to doing like a Let's Play video next week. So hope that works out for everyone, but let me know if you have any preferences, and I will try to keep that in mind going forward. Okay, so this week I have been working on the scripts for exploring the headquarter campus and working on building your stats, which was already implemented. As far as like using the different locations to build your stats by doing the random activities. This time I am working on, whoops, let me go to this screen, implementing the love interests or the NPCs. So anybody who's familiar with my previous work on I'm the Supreme Villainess game, my goal for that game was to have different locations within like the little cottage that the protagonists found themselves in, and gradually introduce characters that would be in different locations within the cottage doing different activities during different hours of the day. Well, at that time, I didn't know how to use objects, and so everything was just long strings of if-else statements. And by the time I was at day 4, the coding was so out of control and hard to parse and look at that I pretty much gave up because it was such a headache, and trying to add another day just made my work just kind of spiral exponentially in these paths that were like totally out of control. I enjoyed having characters have like different locations, and having the player have like the freedom to go to like different places to unlock different conversations and different activities and kind of have different bonding moments with the characters of their choice, or like trying to learn like the characters like routines. I thought that was all like interesting from a player standpoint, and probably like the best part of the game. The solving puzzles or overcoming stat requirements through like random events and RNG was like not a good thing in that game. Trying to take what I learned that worked in that game and apply it to Exg and take the things that didn't work and improve upon them. So I think whenever you are building a game around location, and I guess let's call them like flexible events where things trigger depending on like multiple conditionals, depending on how the player is using their time, or a bunch of like kind of like micro decisions. I think that from the coding end, it's a bit different from a traditional visual novel, and I start treating not only the characters as separate objects, but the types of events as separate objects, because you just end up with so many different types of choices that you're trying to track that at least for me, it becomes overwhelming to have it all tied to like one object. So I can organize it a little bit better by separating it into like the different types of events. So We have the different characters that have their different schedules. So in this game, it's more lenient. You don't have to be in the same place at the same exact hour as the character in order to unlock the event with them. You just need to be within the same time of day. So characters have a set schedule by day of the week, and whether it's like the morning or it's the evening. So in the case of Wessing, on Mondays he'll be at the trading district, and then Monday mornings, and then Monday evenings he'll be at the library, and so on and so forth for the different days of the week. And he will stick to that schedule for the most part, unless there is like a special event. So this is going to be their like daily, weekly routines, and so those have their own object class that they have assigned for each one of the characters, and I have that set up as like Wessing routine is like the name of the object, and the object class is routines. So we have different variables to track, if it's like the morning event and what day, and if how many times you've triggered this event, and whether or not you've had a conversation with them on this day and that morning. And these are things that like reset at night. At least in the case of the true-false statements, were set at night. And then like the integer tracking is usually like to make sure that the dialogue is progressing and not like repeating. That's what we have for the daily stuff, and each one of the characters here has their own like daily folder with the scripts for each day and evening. Game also has events to happen like when the character wakes up and when the character goes to bed, so they have their own like morning and evening scripts. And this is similar to like what was in Gotcha Date, Arcane Dice Wars Gotcha Date, where you had like daily emails, and you had kind of like the main character was kind of talking to themselves like in the morning, and reflecting on like kind of like the events that were unfolding. Let's see, so we have the daily routines. We also have like special events that can happen, usually to unlock characters or unlock their ability to text message them. So those have their own kind of objects and tracking that are separate from like the daily events. And when I'm checking, so each one of the locations has their own like little checking thing for if you're like hanging out there for an hour to see if an event triggers. And so like in the case of like the spa event, which there was like a little bit of a teaser preview that you could view in the demo that was released so far of like Wessing's event to unlock his texting and his romance route. It'll do a check to see how you are in that event, if the event conditionals have been unlocked. And then once it's completed, then the next option will be to go to their daily routine. So that's the case for when Oren is talking to Laurent and you're trying to like kind of make an appointment with him so he can potentially become a guide for you. That's like an event too that will like have a beginning, middle, and end, as opposed to the daily conversations, which are kind of like ongoing throughout the game. Other than that, there's also like the texting, which have their own objects and properties as well. So we have both the character or the NPC initiated text, which happens a lot with like Orwin, does a lot of texting to the main character. And then we also have like if the main character initiates text. So that was something that was added that wasn't in the original demo, but I just thought it would be fun for the player to be able to also have that level of agency. Those are its own objects that has its own like stats that it's tracking. Again, a lot of the true and false statements are whether or not you've done the activity for the day, so you can't just keep spamming it. And then the tracking, the numerical tracking, is to track like how many times the player has done this interaction so that the text doesn't get too repetitive. I'll probably have conditionals at some point where it might go into some randomization, like you might have a sequence of conversations that progress up to a certain point, similar to how dungeon conversations work, where you'll have a generous amount of progressive text, and then if you go through all of that text because you're really going hard after one character and you're kind of ignoring all the other activities in the game, then it'll start having like a parameter where you'll get kind of like randomized text until the end of that chapter. So that way you could, I guess, I'm just kind of covering my bases to make sure if the player does decide to like go in a direction that would be kind of game breaking, to be like, I'm just going to do this one thing over and over and over and over again because I've given the freedom to do that. Then it will start to go into a loop of random chatter until you progress in the actual like game progression. So that's at least one way that I try to deal with like not having repetitive text, but not like making mountains of like text that the player will never ever see. Although I do think that overall I probably err on the side of caution, where I think I have more unique text than what I probably need. Because with the randomized text, I usually have like a decent amount of random options that it shouldn't be too like repetitive. So there probably will still be some dialogue that most players will never see. But yeah, that's my approach with like making this style of dialogue that is like location and choice driven, as opposed to having it be more of a linear kind of format that like most visual novels would be in. So like that's why all my files have so many different labels here, and different folders with all these different labels inside of them, because there's not really like a start point where it goes from like scene 1 to scene 2 to scene 3 to scene 4. This would be the types of, I guess, challenges that you would have to overcome if you plan on having this style of game. For like long-term sustainability of the game, that's what I learned from like working on the Villainous game, was that it's really hard to have just like jump labels, variables, and conditionals and have this format of a game. Like I feel like there's just too much to track, that having objects and functions is kind of important, and call statements as well. Let me go ahead and jump into showing off what kind of some of what I did. Okay, so I can answer one of these options. These choices give you a chance to build the bonding stats with him. Those bonding stats being the attraction, trust, and dependency. He is going to be at the spa. So the first event is going to keep triggering, and there is like conditions to like if you don't meet the parameters that you can like approach him again. I'm going to spend all this money in time. Not very efficient, but I'm going to spend this time to make sure that my empathy is high enough for this particular stat check. So this event where you have an opportunity to make a date with Wessing, to hang out at the spa together, normally requires empathy of 15, so that's why I spammed all that staying at the spa so I can meet this prerequisite. But if I didn't, it would have a different conversation, that if you met him at the spa again and had failed this stat check, it would have an alternate dialogue to give you the option to try to interact with him again and to try to meet this threshold. So if we agree to this, then we do get his messenger. And that is all of our hours for the day, so we've got to go back. Okay, so before we can go to sleep and move to the next day, we always have to check our messages. Orwin's really angry at us for not going into the simulation room to do our training, because we spent all our time trying to meet Wessing at the spa. And so this is a text message that's dependent on that particular event. And then when we go to have this option to text somebody, because we did get his text information, we can tap texting him. And then have the conversation with him there. And again, these options have the ability to build more of those like bonding stats. So those bonding stats are pretty much just dependent on having guiding sessions with the guides and having conversation dialogues. So I try to make it that although most of the dialogue will not like lock you into a particular route, most of the dialogue will have the option to affect your stats, whether it's with bonding with the characters or it is increasing your social stat skills. So that way it's not like you're answering pointlessly, but you're also not you're not depending your like entire game on like having to answer all these lots of different questions in a particular order. I'm hoping that the player can answer the questions in the way that they want, and still have some type of indication in the game is tracking the types of responses they're making, but not ever having like this thing where they're like railroaded into like looking up a guide, like I have to answer things in a certain way. Okay, other than that, I have been working on some sprites this past week too. So we are starting to work on Jade and Jade's manager, Ottoman Ty. And then we are going to also have more of the different costumes for the spa activity, library, and for the gym. Right, that's pretty much been my last couple of weeks on the development front, and yeah, it's been fun. It's been hot. I am looking forward to the weather kind of like cooling off a little bit, and hope you guys are having a good week and have a good upcoming week. As always, don't forget to enjoy the process. Take care. Bye bye.